Warning: these social media platforms may be hazardous to your health. Censorship kills. Pain coming. This has been a PSA by Breaking Spectre. Well, good morning, everybody. How we doing? Spectre here for another edition of In Case You Missed It news. Got a lot of ground to cover here this morning. I'll talk a little bit about the old weather here. Contrary to popular belief, I did not float away here after this past weekend's deluge and that we've had. I think the official rain gauge taps out at about 4.6, 4.7 inches of rain since Saturday night, and everything is a little damp and moist around these parts. But tell you what, we'll get after it here momentarily. We'll see you back here on the other side. Hey everybody, Spectre here. Want to tell you about my Teespring store that I just opened up with a handful of products in that for you guys, the listeners, the audience, those that are in chat on a day in, day out basis. Always appreciate your support, and I figured what the heck, we'll throw some merch out there for you guys. And so obviously with YouTube and Earth Shenanigans as of late, I'm going to be looking to expand to other platforms, and well, it all comes at a cost, so I figured what the heck. That being said, I got some t-shirts and that out here. You can see those in black, white, and gray. Spectre Does News. Got a water tumbler, 20 ounce there. Got a coffee mug you can get in black or white. And of course, we got the Let's Go Brandon #FJB shirt, which you can also find in black, white, or gray. Right now, you can find that all over at https specters-storefront.creator-spring.com. That's https://specters-storefront.creator-spring.com. Thank you for your support. All right, well, welcome back. As I mentioned here at the start of the broadcast, the weather in that has certainly been quite eventful. And of course, if you see right through the middle part of the country here, all the way over to the northeast, and that sucker managed to dump a sizable portion of rain over the weekend. Looks like it's still wreaking a little bit of havoc, and probably will through the southeast and that here throughout the day. I can only imagine that this little ditty heading out here, this little bomb cyclone, whatever business they've got spreading across the northeast. Well, let's hope that thing dissipates by the time it gets here. We need a little time to dry out here throughout the course of the week. So, quite interesting. Aside from that, futures rise ahead of deluge of big tech earnings. One day after Goldman doubled down on its call for a market melt-up into year-end, futures on the NASDAQ 100 edged higher, while contracts on the S&P 500 were modestly higher on Monday, approaching record highs again as investors braced for a flood of earnings. 164 of 500 S&P companies report this week, and of course we'll cover that here momentarily. Says while weighing rising inflation concerns, COVID-19 risks, and China's deteriorating outlook, Goldman slashed China's 2022 GDP to 5.2% from 5.6% overnight. The FOMC enters quiet period ahead of next week's FOMC meeting, which means no Fed speakers, as attention shifts to economic data and corporate earnings. At 7:45 a.m. Eastern, Dow E-minis were up 3 points, or 0.01%. S&P 500 E-minis were up 4.25 points, or 0.1%. And NASDAQ 100 E-minis were up 36.25 points, or 0.25%. Bitcoin bounced back over 63,000 after sliding below 60K over the weekend. The 10-year U.S. Treasury yield rose, and the dollar also rose after the Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell flagged that inflation could stay higher for longer. So I guess it's not transitory then, if that's the definition, right? Fueling investor concern, sticky price increases may force policymakers to raise borrowing costs. And of course, here we see the E-mini S&P futures. Global markets have remained resilient despite risks from price pressures stoked by supply chain bottlenecks and higher energy costs. On Sunday, Janet Yellen was among those counseling the inflation situation reflects temporary pain that will ease in the second half of 2022, even as Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey warned hyperinflation is coming. Investors are wary that tighter monetary policy to keep inflation in check will stir volatility. So scrolling down here, some of the movers on the day so far. Banca Monte dei Paschi slides as much as 9.5% after the Italian government and Unicredit ended talks over the sale of the lender rather. Exor shares gain as much as 5.6% in Milan, trading to the highest level on record after a report that Agnelli family's holding company revived talks with Covia for the sale of Exor's reinsurance unit, Partner Re. Banco Sabadell jumps as much as 5.6% after it said it rejected an offer for its TSB bank unit in the UK from Cooperative Bank. SSAB rises as much as 5.2% after the Swedish steelmaker posted third quarter earnings well above analyst expectations. Handelsbanken analyst Gustav Schwerin said the figures were very strong. Weir Group rises as much as 3.7% after Exane BNP Paribas raised the stock to outperform. Analyst Bruno Gianni says the stock's underperformance year to date provides a compelling entry opportunity. Darktrace drops as much as 26% after Peel Hunt initiated coverage of the cybersecurity firm with a sell rating and 473p price target that implies about 50% downside to Friday's close. Nordic Semiconductor declines as much as 8.8% after ABG Sundal Collier downgraded to hold. And there's German IFO business climate. Looks like it's starting to tail off there. And of course, flashing down into some of the overnight news and that out of Bloomberg. S&P futures up 0.1% to 45.42 and change. Stocks Europe 600 little changed at 472.03. Nikkei down 0.7% to 28,600 and change. Shanghai Composite up 0.8% to 3609.86. Brent futures up 0.7% to 86.14 a barrel. Gold spot up 0.4% to 1800.45 per ounce. US dollar index down 0.1% to 93.55 and the euro up 0.1% to 1.1655. Some of the other overnight news out of Bloomberg. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen defended Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell's record on regulating the financial system, which has been a target of criticism from progressive Dems arguing he shouldn't get a new term. Wink, wink to Elizabeth Warren, right? Yellen said she expects price increases to remain high through the first half of 2022, but rejected criticism that the U.S. risks losing control of inflation. Speaker Nancy Pelosi opened the door to Dems using a special budget tool to raise the U.S. debt ceiling without the support of Senate Republicans, whose votes would otherwise be needed to end a filibuster on the increase. Interesting. And of course, December 3rd, not too far down the road here. We'll see if they kick the can any further or not. President Joe Biden and fellow Dems are racing to reach agreement on a scaled-back version of his economic agenda, with a self-imposed deadline and his departure later this week for summits in Europe, intensifying pressure on negotiations. Bundesbank chief Jens Wiedemann's surprise announcement last week that he will leave on December 31st has hit Berlin at a sensitive time, with Chancellor Angela Merkel currently running only a caretaker administration in the aftermath of an election whose outcome is likely to remove her CDU party from power. Some holders of an Evergrande bond on which the embattled developer had missed a coupon deadline last month received the interest before the end of a grace period Saturday, according to people familiar with the matter. Over to News Squawk and back at the Asia side, Xi takes veiled swipe at U.S. as China marks 50 years at UN. Hong Kong convicts second person under national security law. Gold extends gains as inflation risks and virus concerns persist. Amnesty to quit Hong Kong citing fears under security law. Back over to Europe, the man behind Erdogan's worst spat with the West on a quick take. Wiedemann's succession suspense may last for weeks on Berlin talks. Cat Rock Capital urges Just Eat takeaway to sell. Grubhub. European gas jumps most in a week as Russian supplies slump. And pretty skinny day on the old event calendar here on this Monday the 25th, 8:30 a.m. September Chicago Fed National Activity Index estimated at a point 0.2, prior as a point 0.29. 10:30 a.m. October Dallas Fed Manufacturing Activity estimate of a 6.2 versus a prior 4.6. As far as earnings and that go here this week, Earnings Whispers got this here before bell today. We got Otis, Travel Zoo, Lennox, RBI, just to name a few, and a couple other majors net after close today. I'll be looking at Facebook, Logitech, Crown, and that looks to be some of the major ones here. So we got a pretty jam-packed week. We'll keep an eye on it. Aside from that, all the metals mined in one visualization. Interesting article dating back to Friday late. Says metals are all around us, from our phones and cars to our homes and office buildings. While we often overlook the presence of these raw materials, they are an essential part of the modern economy. But, as visual capitalist Govind Butara details below, obtaining these materials can be a complex process that involves mining, refining, and then converting them into usable forms. So, how much metal gets mined in a year? And here it looks like per industrial metals, we're talking about 207.4 million tons. Tech precious metals, about 1.335 million tons. So a pretty sizable stake here. And it looks like by way of copper, 20.7 million tons, lead 4.7, nickel 2.7. Manganese, 56.6 million tons, 62.9 million tons of aluminum. Looks like maybe, what's this one right here? Chromium, 38.6 million. Oh, I wonder where lithium is. Zinc, 12.3. We've talked a little bit about that in recent weeks. Lithium obviously is going to be something that's going to be pretty heavy, I would say, by way of batteries and everything else here before long. But it's a question of where they're going to find that stuff, right? Metals versus ores. Before digging into the numbers, it's important that we distinguish between ores and metals. Ores are naturally occurring rocks that contain metals and metal compounds. Metals are the valuable parts of ores that can be extracted by separating and removing the waste rock. As a result, ore production is typically much higher than the actual metal content of the ore. For example, miners produced 347 million tons of bauxite ore in 2019, but the actual aluminum metal content extracted from that was only 62.9 million tons. Here are all the metals and metal ores mined in 2019 according to the British Geological Survey. So for iron ore, we're talking about 3 billion tons, of which 93% is apparently usable. Industrial metals, 207 million, 6.39% of total. Technology precious metals, again, the 1.335 that we saw in the graphic above. Miners produced roughly 3 billion tons of iron ore in 2019, representing close to 94% of all mined metals. The primary use of all this iron is to make steel. In fact, 98% of iron ore goes into steel making, with the rest fulfilling various other applications. Industrial and technology metals made up the other 6% of all mined metals in 2019. So how do they break down? Well, from industrial metals, from construction and ag to manufacturing and transportation, virtually every industry harnesses the properties of metals in different ways. Here are the industrial metals mined in 2019. And further breakdown: aluminum, manganese ore, chromium, copper, zinc, titanium, lead, nickel, zirconium, magnesium, etc. And nowhere on there is lithium, surprisingly. It's no surprise that aluminum is the most produced industrial metal. The lightweight metal is one of the most commonly used materials in the world, with uses ranging from making foils and beer kegs to buildings and aircraft parts. Manganese and chromium rank second and third respectively in terms of metal mined, and are important ingredients in steel making. Manganese helps convert iron ore into steel, and chromium hardens and toughens steel. Furthermore, manganese is a critical ingredient of lithium manganese cobalt oxide, NMC, batteries for electric vehicles. Aha, there we go. It says although copper production is around 1/3 of that of aluminum, copper has a key role in making modern life possible. The red metal is found in virtually every wire, motor, and electrical appliance in our homes and offices. It's also critical for various renewable energy technologies and electric vehicles. So, bottom line, you kind of get the idea here. A little bit of a lengthy read, but the graphic, I think, pretty well says it all. Mining is here to stay. We're still going to need metals at the end of the day. And guess what? How do you get all that stuff out of the ground if it weren't for, say, dirty, bad carbon fuels? You know, the fact that, like COP26, we've talked about in recent weeks, has to charge our Teslas with diesel engines. Does that make a lick of sense to you? Nah, me neither. Part shortages hit auto repair shops, taking weeks to fix vehicles. So, talking about our supply chains and the breakdown, there are several articles on shipping related stuff. I may end up having to just cut a separate piece on that. There was just so much coming through, and I didn't want to litter this morning's broadcast with just that, but this touches on that as well. A global semiconductor shortage has reduced new car production and boosted used car demand. The average used car age on U.S. highways hit 12.1 this year, a record high, and has unleashed a repair boom. But with snarled supply chains, auto repair shops have had difficulty sourcing parts and told customers that their cars could take weeks to fix, according to Bloomberg. Paul McCarthy, chief executive of the Automotive Aftermarket Suppliers Association, said that the auto parts and repair industry is getting slammed like everyone else. Delays stretching from weeks due to port congestion have produced hefty backlogs. This is the most difficult supply chain environment that I have ever seen, AutoZone Inc. CEO William Rhodes said in a September earnings call. AutoZone is operating at the lowest level of in-stock that I can ever remember, he said. For repair shops, breaking the news to customers that their broken cars might not be fixed for weeks because of a part on backorder has been difficult. Brian Kelly, the owner of Valley Automotive Repair and Electric, had to wait months for parts in the Seattle suburbs. He said a crankshaft position sensor took between 60 and 90 days to arrive, adding that the sensors used to take less than a day in pre-COVID times. Kelly said one customer was about to give up on fixing his Dodge Ram 1500 because of the sensor backlog. He went as far as to say, "I'm going to tow it and buy another truck," said Kelly, who's also chairman of the Automotive Service Association Northwest Trade Group. It got compounded when he found he couldn't just go down and buy one. Another instance in the Philadelphia suburbs where Matlock's Nissan Sentra flooded during Hurricane Ida in early September. The storm left her car's interior moist. She took her car to Colquitt Technical Services in Lansdale, Pennsylvania for new carpets, but mechanics told her no carpet sets were available. The workaround the mechanics advised her to do was rip up the old carpet and have it professionally cleaned, then reinstalled. In Bethesda, Maryland, River Road Auto Service Manager Danny Thomasine said even oil filters are becoming harder to get. So when I buy them in as big a quantities I can get. Compounding a repair boom with port congestion across China and U.S. adds to domestic shortages of parts and increased prices. McCarthy of the Suppliers Association warned the shortage of aftermarket parts could get worse into next year. Colquitt, the Philadelphia area garage owner, called the shortage of parts and persistent delays. We lovingly refer to it as an intergalactic backorder. And it's not just sensors and oil filters that are becoming harder to find. Some tires have been in short supply that take well over a month to receive. So bottom line, if you need any of that stuff, chances are you probably want to get on the stick and find that now well ahead of time, should you absolutely need it later on down the road and cannot find it. Aside from that, over to freight waves. Supply chain disruptions curtail Union Pacific's intermodal volumes. So this is kind of a knock-on effect of what's playing out in the ports and that, and whether or not these containers and that are going to get transported across the country. So despite flat volumes and higher fuel costs, UP achieves record Q3 operating ratio. So extended chassis dwell times and a lack of dray drivers dampen Union Pacific's intermodal traffic in the third quarter. But the railroad hopes volumes will rebound once the disruptions clear and consumer activity picks up post-pandemic. executives said during Union Pacific's third quarter earnings call. There are some really good looking markers that tell us the economy is in a pretty strong place, and maybe will stay there for a while, President and CEO Lance Fritz said on the Thursday call. There's a lot of cash on deposit accounts that people are sitting on, and that is dry powder yet to be deployed in spending. As long as consumers continue to spend on things, that's really good for the goods economy, which, of course, is a part of the economy that we participate in. Well, based on the last couple articles I read, if there aren't things in the shelf, what's the likelihood people are going to want to spend? I don't know, just saying. Fritz continued. Once the COVID pandemic gets under control and we get continued signs of normalcy, consumers will spend that money, and the low inventory to sales ratio is going to drive a need for continued stocking. Certainly, as we head into 2022, it looks like a strong environment. Easing supply chain disruptions means putting more attention on ensuring adequate workforce numbers among dray drivers, at warehouse and distribution centers, and at the ports, according to Fritz. I believe the Biden administration has identified basically increasing the throughput capability and the capacity capability, and understands that we need to help put labor that's available into those jobs and make more labor available for those jobs. If we could snap our fingers on the back end, we would love to see more dray and warehouse distribution capacity. That's the first thing that we would love to see. I think that would fundamentally change the street time for chassis and boxes, Fritz said. UP's intermodal volumes in the third quarter slipped 6% year over year to 809,000 units, although intermodal revenue rose 8% to $1.15 billion. UP attributed the volume decline to the tight dray market and not having enough dray capacity to support the overall supply chain. To ease supply chain disruptions inland, the railroad has been utilizing its previously idled Global 3 facility near Chicago, and it has placed 5,000 cars strategically throughout the network, according to Eric Geringer, Executive Vice President of Operations. UP has also extended hours at selected ramps, and it has changed the hours of operation at the ICTF in Los Angeles to run 24 hours a day, Geringer said. We can take the volume, we can handle the volume efficiently, but we'll just increase everything to 24/7. Well, that's fine and dandy for port operations, but as mentioned here, it takes more than just that. It takes warehouse operators and distribution facilities and everything else to support that as well, and it's clearly not there, as evidenced by the article I put up on Friday. That being said, RV capital of the world sees influx of new residents as Americans abandon big city living. And of course, COVID has probably prompted a lot of that with their ridiculous lockdown policies and everything else. Says every once in a while, a headline cuts right through the haze of statistics and really tells you something about the complicated state of what's really going on in the U.S. And somehow, the Wall Street Journal did it Tuesday with an article about how surging home prices, particularly in densely populated cities, and a shift towards a remote work lifestyle are causing significant numbers of Americans to move away from big urban centers like New York City and smaller or mid-sized cities. Many of the cities on the receiving end are happy to see newcomers after decades of decline in their industrial base, hollowed out over decades of deindustrialization. And their transition is a loss for largely blue states like Cali and New York that are hiking taxes and driving more taxpayers away. And the latest sign of this shift away from the more than decade-long shift of young people moving to big cities, Elkhart, Indiana, which calls itself the RV capital of the world, based on the fact that it's the largest RV manufacturer in the U.S., was the leading county in Realtor.com's latest. According to the latest data from Realtor.com News Corp, the last quarter was a very good one for Elkhart's real estate market, which is hotter than it's been in decades. The Indiana County topped the Wall Street Journal's Emerging House Market Index in the third quarter. The index claims to identify the top metro areas for homebuyers seeking an appreciating housing market and appealing lifestyle amenities. Per the Wall Street Journal, the index's top-ranked markets saw faster-growing populations, and more shopping interest from shoppers outside their metro areas than the market as a whole, said Danielle Hale, chief economist at Realtor.com. And so the breakdown is this. They see that Elkhart, Goshen, Indiana is moving on up toward the top. Rapid City, Topeka, Raleigh, Jefferson City, Burlington, all moving up. Coeur d'Alene moving slightly down. Eureka, Arcata, Fortuna, California moving up. And Johnson City moving down, as well as Huntsville, Alabama to round out the top 10. Says, just in case you didn't put the pieces together yourself, the WSJ reports that the COVID pandemic has spurred more RV demand, as households wanted to travel while keeping their distance from others. Unemployment in Elkhart did sit at 3% in August, compared with the 5.1% headline national average. The median home sale prices in Elkhart County rose 12.3% in August from a year earlier to $209,900. According to the Indiana Association of Realtors. There were 163 homes for sale that month, down from 220 a year earlier. Market activity has slowed slightly in recent weeks, but anything under 250K still goes very, very fast, Ms. Miller said. Those are the hardest to come by and the fastest to sell. They even managed to measure the fact that about 65% of the page buys on Elkhart area property listings came from outside the metro area to illustrate the pace of interest from out-of-town buyers. It's just the latest sign that, as we noted last week, job openings are soaring as millions of Americans are moving to new places and looking to start over. Yeah, you would think by now that the blue states would probably learn this, but probably not. So it is what it is, and I suspect we'll probably continue to see the trends continue, right? Outside of that, is stagflation here, comparing the 2020s with the 1970s. And this is a bit of a long read. I'm not going to get through it all, but I do want to hit some of the highlights here. For those that lived through the 70s, back in the Jimmy Carter era, probably remember the painful effects of extremely high interest rates, the oil catastrophes that played out in the early and mid to late 70s as well. All of that highlighted in this article. Says now that the fear of stagflation is a growing concern on Wall Street, as the latest Bank of America Fund Manager survey showed. And they're showing above trend growth, above trend inflation, below trend growth, above trend inflation, kind of where that's headed here. Says as the inflation debate at a time of shrinking global growth has taken on renewed vigor, given the latest commodity price surge over recent weeks, the energy shocks and discussions around stagflation have led many to make the comparison to the 1970s, not just on this site. And it says about to get much worse, according to an article last week. But elsewhere, Paul Tudor Jones, CEO of Tudor Investment Corp, tells CNBC that inflation is the single biggest threat to the economy. The inflation genie is out of the bottle, and we run the risk of returning to the 1970s. That out of CNBC. Is stagflation coming back? Economist sees parallels with the 1970s and big differences out of Barron's. Is the world economy going back to the 1970s? Out of The Economist. What the inflation of the 1970s can teach us today? Wall Street Journal. Conditions are ripe for repeat of 1970s stagflation. Out of The Guardian. Ignore the fearmongers. The 1970s are not coming back. According to The Guardian. A stock market malaise with the shadow of 70s style stagflation. New York Times. Almost seems like they're pushing an agenda here with all the Mockingbird media tropes net talking the same thing, aren't they? So, addressing these growing comparisons between the 2020s and the 1970s, last week Deutsche Bank's credit strategist Henry Allen and Jim Reed looked into some of the similarities and differences between the infamous inflationary decade and today. Below we summarize some of the key observations made by the duo, who looked at how the 1970s evolved from an inflationary perspective and compare and contrast to today. We start by reminding readers that things were very bad in the 1970s. As Deutsche Bank writes, TV screens in the UK have recently shown scenes of long lines for gas across the vast majority of fueling stations. Initially, this wasn't about a shortage of fuel, but a shortage of HGV drivers that fed upon itself to become a fuel shortage amidst a demand surge as well. Right now, we're still a long way from what we saw in the 1970s, when there were big reductions in the supply of energy. But the recent rise in global gas prices could be much more troublesome going forward. Across the globe, fuel rationing took place for a period of time back then, and governments ran huge media campaigns to conserve energy. President Nixon asked gas stations not to sell gasoline on Saturday or Sunday nights, and eventually license plate restrictions, odd and even, were in place in the US for when you could buy fuel. And in Europe, some examples of the stresses included a ban in the Netherlands on Sunday driving, whilst the UK imposed a 3-day week as coal shortages threatened electricity supplies, alongside a winter series of strikes by coal miners and rail workers. Households were asked to heat only one room in their home. Wow. How did inflation get out of control in the 1970s? Well, today's situation has a number of parallels to what happened in the 1960s and 70s. In the U.S., the Johnson administration, Great Society programs, and the Vietnam War drove up fiscal spending in the late 1960s. In 1971, President Nixon ended the dollar's link to gold, ending the system of fixed exchange rates that had prevailed after the Second World War. An El Nino event in 1972 drove up food prices. The dollar underwent a devaluation in February 1973. Then, on top of all this, the first oil shock occurred in 1973, followed by a second oil shock in 1979. Some of the other highlights: the inflationary setup in the 1970s then deteriorated thanks to the suspension of the dollar's convertibility into gold in 1971. And here it's highlighting blended money supply growth flattened out between, say 1951, 1981 there. We've moved from pre-COVID mid-single-digit year-over-year percentage growth to a brief period of 25% year-over-year growth at the peak. Some other highlights here. 1973 was the first oil shock, as it alludes to. Triggered a recession across multiple countries. It began in late 1973. And here we see West Texas Intermediate oil prices per barrel dating back then, where we got this stark jump up, and then a second oil shock again in 1979. At the time, the view was that the embargo was a structural shock that monetary policy couldn't affect, so it should therefore look through such a transitory factor. That should ring a few bells. What has our Fed Chairman Powell been saying? Everything is transitory? Yeah, right. Real Fed funds rates, calculated by subtracting year-on-year CPI from the effective federal funds rate. That's what it looked like back then, going starkly negative, and look at that. We're kind of in that same boat, say, now. And it says the shock had revealed that dependence of the United States and others on foreign oil, so an emphasis was placed on reducing that dependence. And, by the way, what is Joe trying to do now? Put us back on dependence with OPEC and begging them to increase output, which, by the way, it's only been 1 year ago. Breitbart had an article that says for the first time in quite some time, the U.S. was largely independent. We were actually exporting energy just 1 year ago. The Fed had recently undertaken a dovish shift following the recent policy review. 1979, we had the second oil shock. And of course, we see the Federal Reserve staff inflation forecast by meeting date 77, 78, 79, 80, up, and up. Monetary policy, debt, demographics, globalization, energy reliance, union power, war, geopolitics, and climate change, and the lessons of history. All those were contributing factors. Aside from that, what lessons can we learn from this? Well, looking at the 1970s, the most important lesson is that even if inflation is down to transitory factors, the arrival of yet more transitory shocks can accumulate to keep inflation at high levels, with expectations becoming unanchored. That was what occurred with the oil shocks, although inflation was sent sharply higher. The truth is that inflation was pretty high already, as a legacy from the late 1960s, and the shocks turbocharged it yet further. But we can view the events of the 1970s with the benefit of hindsight. For policymakers at the time, it was less obvious that these shocks would not prove transitory, and today they face a similar dilemma. If policy reacts too forcefully to something central banks can't control, like inflation thanks to supply chain disruptions, then that risks undermining the recovery and actually pushing inflation below target, since the shock will eventually pass and monetary policy operates with a lag. On the other hand, doing nothing risks inflation expectations becoming unanchored, particularly if another shock then arrives to push inflation higher still. One can also argue that the money supply growth was so strong over the past 18 months, there has been a strong monetary angle to inflation, and therefore some tightening of monetary policy is sensible. Overall, it's an unenviable dilemma, and the debate in economics profession right now speaks to the unknowns. So, we approach this question with some humility. But we do think it worth noting that many factors like debt, demographics, and globalization all indicate that we could be facing an even more difficult situation than we saw back then. And the monetary aggregates have also seen a much more rapid increase as well. So policymakers will need to be vigilant for a potential repeat, particularly given that the institutional memories of high inflation have faded over time. And there's more to this report, but bottom line, I think the parallels are certainly there. But as mentioned here, globalization and that has certainly played its part in the run up to what we're now seeing with supply disruptions. 90 to 100 container ships sitting off the various ports and that can't get it done. And oh, never mind the fact that the Fed has been printing 120 billion a month for about 20 months or so. I'm sure that has absolutely no effect whatsoever. In any case, millions of jobs at risk as Europe faces magnesium shortage. And of course, we just got done talking about metals and their various uses at the onset of the show here. Europe purchases 95% of its magnesium from China, which will run out of the industrial metal used to strengthen aluminum by the end of November, that could threaten millions of jobs in sectors from automobiles to aerospace to defense and much more, according to Bloomberg. Three trade groups, including European Aluminum, Eurometro, Eurometaux, and Industrial, warn shipments from China are dwindling quick due to power cuts to energy-intensive magnesium smelters. They said if reserves of the industrial metal aren't increased in the near term, it may result in trade production shortages, factory closures, and job losses. And so here we see the downtick between week 36, week 41 on the European side. Says supply of magnesium originating from China has either been halted or reduced drastically since September 2021, resulting in an international supply crisis of unprecedented magnitude, the trade group said. They urged Brussels to urgently work toward immediate actions with their Chinese counterparties to mitigate the short-term critical shortage issue as well as longer-term supply effects on European industries. Well, I guess the only way to combat that is for Europe to start sending coal China's way, because ultimately that's what they need. Magnesium, which is used extensively in the aerospace industry, is a metal for producing aluminum alloys in the automotive industry and could compound issues for European car makers already dealing with crippling chip shortages. Morgan Stanley's Amy Sargent and Ioannis Masvoulis told clients last week that Europe stands out as the most exposed region to magnesium shortfalls from China. They said Europe shuttered its last magnesium smelter in 2001. This means that there's no way for Europe to domestically increase magnesium supplies and hinges all on China's output. Days ago, Barclays analyst Amos Fletcher, warned clients there are no substitutes for magnesium in aluminum sheet and billet production. He said if magnesium supply stops, well, the entire auto industry will grind to a halt. European Aluminum, whose members include Norsk Hydro, Rio Tinto, and Alcoa, said the current magnesium supply shortage is a clear example of the risk the EU is taking by making its domestic economy dependent on Chinese imports. The EU's industrial metals strategy must be strengthened. Morgan Stanley warns, should magnesium shortages persist through to 2022, there is a growing risk of downstream demand destruction, as smelters may be unable to produce specific aluminum alloys for the automotive, building, and packaging sectors. In that scenario, we could see a shift towards commodity-grade standard ingot. The unintended consequences of European officials deciding decades ago to rely entirely on China for magnesium could spell disaster for millions of jobs if reserves aren't replenished soon. So, to all those Tesla makers and various automotive manufacturers and that, see what all that nice just-in-time supply chain management has done? You pigeonhole yourself into one spot, and if there's any single problem with that particular source, it all goes kaput. Problem of their own making. Outside of some financials here this morning, New American had this as Biden planned to overwhelm border worked. Custom Border Patrol apprehended 1.7 plus million illegals in fiscal year 21. The Biden administration's plan to import as many future Dem voters as possible in fiscal year 21 was a smashing success. U.S. Customs and Border Protection reported late Friday that border agents apprehended almost 1.75 million illegals trying to jump the border or showed up at ports of entry. For the last month of the fiscal year, which ended September 30th, agents apprehended more than 192,000. The figure for the year is the highest in the agency's near-century-long history. Last year, agents captured 458,088, meaning Biden nearly quadrupled it. Biden sent tens of thousands into American communities with the help of leftist Cuban immigrant Alejandro Mayorkas, his Homeland Security Secretary. Biden promised open borders during his campaign, then kept it on Inauguration Day by rescinding President Trump's Remain in Mexico policy. The penniless masses below the border got the message. They got it in Asia and Africa, too. Come to America. Joe has a place for you. So by the numbers, well, fiscal year 2021 ended with these numbers: 192,001 apprehensions in September, an 8.5% decrease from the 209,940 in August. For the year, agents apprehended 1,734,686, a 278.7% increase over last year's 458,088. That's the highest number in CBP's 97-year life, the Washington Examiner reported. CBP explained the rest in a detailed release. Unique encounters in September, 142,710, a 9% reduction in unique encounters from the prior month. 192,001 encounters along the southwest border, a 9% decrease compared to August. Of those, 26% involved individuals who had at least one prior encounter in the previous 12 months, compared to an average one-year re-encounter rate of 14% for fiscal year 2014 or full year 2014 to 2019. 59% were single adults with 113,030 encounters in September, a 9% increase compared to August. 102,673 encounters, more than 53% of the total, were processed for expulsion under Title 42. 89,238 encounters were processed under Title 8. Two facts that put the annual total of illegals in perspective show just what border agents faced. 1.73 million exceeds the population of Phoenix, Arizona, the fifth largest city in the United States. Agents handled 4,777 illegals every day and 199 per hour. Pretty crazy numbers here. So I'll break from that. I think we get the idea behind the numbers and build the damn wall and start sending these people back. The ridiculousness of dropping these people off in the overnight hours by plane drops. Who's funding all this, by the way? And does DeSantis have it right? You start doing that crap in our state, we're going to charge you with human trafficking, because that's exactly what it is. Who is funding this stuff at the end of the day? Soros Open Society, USAID, who? Catholic Charities? Take your pick. Somebody is making this happen. So aside from that, full court mess. Fed up protesters storm NBA game to condemn Biden's hated vaccine mandate. This out of the Western Journal. Says Brooklyn Nets star Kyrie Irving is not typically known for having conservative political views. However, his staunch opposition to vaccine mandates has put him in opposition to the progressive left. During the Nets' home opener at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, New York on Sunday, a crowd of protesters gathered outside to support Irving and the fight for medical freedom. While there is not a vaccine requirement for all NBA players, a New York City mandate prohibits unjabbed players from playing inside the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, New York. This includes Irving, who has spoken publicly about his refusal to get a COVID-19 jab. This is my life, Irving said earlier this month, according to ESPN. I get to do whatever I want with this. This is one body that I get here. And you are telling me to do what with my body? This has everything to do with what is going on in our world, and I am being grouped into something that is bigger than just the game of basketball. Many people who agree with Irving showed up on Sunday to protest the vaccine mandate that is keeping him from the court. They chanted, "Stand with Kyrie," as they took to the streets. And I presume those aren't just all NBA fans, I presume. But according to Fox News, the protesters held signs reading, "No mandates, my body, my choice," and "equal rights for vaxxed," among others. After marching through the streets, some protesters made their way to the doors of the Barclays Center. A group of Irving supporters had to be restrained by security after pushing towards the arena's entrance. Interesting. I guess they should probably be careful with those bicycle racks. We saw what happened on January 6th when they decided to start picking those puppies up. Next thing you know, those guys are going to be called insurrectionists on the old Barclays Center, huh? This is one of the attendees who did not identify herself but told WPIX she was a school teacher, said her concerns went beyond Irving himself. "I have to stand up for me. I have to stand up for my son," she said. In a statement to Fox News, the Barclays Center confirmed it had to temporarily restrict entry and exit due to the protest, but it said no unauthorized people entered the building. Barclays Center briefly closed its doors today in order to clear protesters from the main doors on the plaza and ensure guests could safely enter the arena, the statement said. Only ticketed guests were able to enter the building, and the game proceeded according to schedule. The Nets may have been able to use Irving during the game, which resulted in a 111-95 loss to the Charlotte Hornets. Fellow Nets All-Star Kevin Durant logged 38 points, but it was not enough to lift his team to victory, for those who actually care about the actual game. So I would expect, yes, we'll probably see more of that throughout the country as all these mandates and that try to get pushed on the masses, and we're seeing a lot of folks stand up against that. Lightfoot in Chicago is going to have a heck of a time here, and I think here tonight, maybe, City Council is expected to pass an ordinance and that rescinding what she has pushed, and we'll see whether or not that does exactly that and puts the Chicago police back on the beat or not. But yeah, nonetheless. Outside of that, also out of the Western Journal, says, "I don't back down. Ban Let's Go Brandon rapper speaks out." And so it says, "It is no secret that President Joe Biden has many critics across the country. From tanking approval ratings to anti-Biden chants in stadiums around the country, the evidence is rather damning. One chant that has gained steam is "Let's Go Brandon," a clean way for Americans to express their disapproval for the president. In fact, it has become so popular that musical artists have begun turning the chant into their own unique songs. For Christian conservative rapper Bryson Gray, that popularity was initially a reason to avoid making a song about the chant. "I'm not a fan of attaching my creativity to trends," Gray said in an October 22nd phone interview with the Western Journal. "I view that as sort of like it's a trend, here today, gone tomorrow, and I feel like my creativity is like past that." However, Gray said his supporters were unrelenting in a request for a "Let's Go Brandon" song. A conservative YouTuber who goes by the name of the Black Conservative Preacher finally caught his attention. He said, "Come on, Bryson, do it for my son. He told me his son listens to my music, but he doesn't let his son listen to the other conservative artists because they curse." Like many other rappers, Gray said he began his career using curse words in his songs and talking about mature subjects. But when he gave his life to Christ, he began feeling convicted about those decisions. Gray added that his own future children played a large role in his decision to become a completely clean rapper. "I just personally felt convicted on it. I think about, like, if I had kids, would I want my kids around me?" he said. So Gray changed his mind and decided to write a clean "Let's Go Brandon" song, despite his previous hesitations. He even enlisted the help of fellow rappers Tyson James and Chandler Crump to help finish the song after he got stuck. The song addresses a multitude of concerns about the Biden administration, from the botched Afghanistan withdrawal to the COVID-19 response, all without cursing. And so let's see if this is just a little piece of that we can play.
Hey, let's go Brandon. I keep a drum like I'm Nick Cannon. Hey, let's go Brandon. Pandemic ain't real, they just planned it. Hey, let's go Brandon. When you ask questions, they start banning. Hey, let's go Brandon. Hey, let's go Brandon. Hey, let's go Brandon. I keep a drum like I'm Nick Cannon. Hey, let's go Brandon. Pandemic ain't real, they just planned it. Hey, let's go Brandon. You ask questions, they start banning. Hey, let's go Brandon. Let's go Brandon. Biden said the jab stopped the spread, it was lies. I remember how you wrote, but you haven't opened your eyes. These politicians are demons just in disguise. Look at Kyrie Irving and Nicki Minaj. Look at Australia, that's what's coming next if we don't stand up. Stop complying with them, taking our rights, it's time to man up. Republicans voting for red back laws, that's just what I can't trust. If you ask questions about the facts, then they gonna ban us. Hey, this is about control, everybody knows, everyone comply.
And of course, you can see that he is obviously an ardent supporter of the Second Amendment as well. Says you can imagine Gray's surprise then when the song was abruptly banned by YouTube. Gray said the lyric video to "Let's Go Brandon" was banned first, followed by the music video. He appealed the decision, but said it took just a few minutes for his appeal to be rejected. And I can attest to that. So I'm like, y'all couldn't even listen to the song again in that amount of time, Gray joked. YouTube's stated reason for removing the song was medical misinformation. Yeah, it's not their new catch-all, by the way. Gray said he believes the website took issue with the line stating, "Pandemic ain't real, they just planned it." Even if most people do not believe that line is true, Gray said he felt his opinion should not be censored. "That's not medical information at all," he said. "Like, based on their own guidelines, that wouldn't make sense unless they're personally interpreting what I said and think they know better than me." YouTube did not immediately respond to the Western Journal's request for comment. And of course, Gray is no stranger to having his music banned. He said Twitch, Spotify, SoundCloud, Bandcamp, and YouTube had all banned some of his content in the past for various reasons. "Every single time they ban me or something ends up happening," he said. So when Spotify and SoundCloud banned Safe Space, the video ended up getting like 600,000 views now on YouTube. "Let's Go Brandon" has been no different. As of October 24th, Gray's song had ascended to the #1 overall spot on the iTunes chart. Says, "I might not be a millionaire," Gray said. "I might not have millions of followers like some of these other influencers. But one thing about the people that support me, one of the main reasons they support me is because of integrity. I don't back down, no matter how many times I get banned." So that's where we'll end it here on the broadcast here this morning. And Little Bird told me that Soapbox is slated to have Mr. Bryson Gray here. Not sure if it's going to be on Tuesday or Thursday, probably in the 10 o'clock hour in the evening for the Mega Mullet Show, but we'll have to play it by ear as to which night that's going to be. So that's going to do it for the broadcast here this morning. Appreciate you guys tuning in as always, and we'll see you back here on the flip side. Take care. God bless everybody.